You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. Joining him is everyone's favorite coach and hair model, Chris, aka Tex McQuilkin, Power Athlete's Director of Performance. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Radio. Welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. And we're joined by the guest of Power Athlete Radio, Mr. John Welborn.
John Welborn, friend of the podcast, and we welcome guest Joel Raether, founder of Fast Performance in Denver, Colorado, and a long list of experience, including University of Denver, sports performance director for the NLL, that's the National Lacrosse League's Mammoth, trainer for hunters, I would say he's trainer of the stars, but trainer of hunters and educator. Where we had the opportunity to connect at the latest NSCA Tactical Conference this year up in San Antonio. And
isn't it down in San Antonio? Are we north of San Antonio?
Left of Austin?
Well, I think we're north of San Antonio.
Out
so
in
up to San Antonio would be like if we were in Mexico.
Well, we like to be at an undisclosed location at Power Athlete. And Joel, we've been at every conference basically speaking, just rivaling each other. And I'm glad we had the opportunity to connect this time around.
Were you guys like secret rivals where like you're like against each other, but then you never really meet, and then finally you meet and you're like, we haven't been friends the whole time?
Yes, because we're always speaking on the same thing. It was change of direction, and then it was some weightlifting for tactical pop this time around, man. So I'm glad we actually got the chance to meet.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was interesting because I know last year, like we're 2 years running now of being back to back in the same room, and I know last year I was like, oh boy, like I hope I don't like piss all over his parade here with what I'm going to talk about, and this year we actually talked before that I went on because I was before you both times, and I'm like, all right, let's try and do better this year because I don't want to try and step over stuff that you're either going to cover and I don't know, just whether it's poor planning or scheduling or whatever else. But I don't know. I don't claim to know.
I'll go with poor planning. That's just accidental. But did he peel on your leg?
Well, I was getting in the zone. I like to just stay in the bathroom and cry,
Chief. I'm in
and then do
zone.
a power pose before my presentation. So I didn't get the opportunity to see him, but they have a recording that I should tune into on NSCA TV. Joel, you just came back from a hunt, and I want to start there. So we have a big population of hunters within our listening community, and
a large contingent of hunters.
Contingent, much better phrase than I said. So yeah, man, let's start there. Let's talk about your latest endeavor. You said you had some adventure going, and man, get into that, and then how you got into hunting to begin with.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Nebraska, and my folks grew up in the Dakotas, and so I mean, at a young age for me, my dad got us into doing our hunter safety early on and hunting upland birds. And I grew up in an area where there was a lot of waterfowl hunting and kind of farming communities and stuff like that. So it was just seemed kind of natural and something that, everybody did where I grew up as a form of, sport, obviously, but at the same time of sustenance and people, hunting deer and things like that every year for food and stuff like that. Not as if, people were starving or running around in loincloths or anything like that, but, it was just kind of a way of life. And for me, when I moved to Colorado, I have a really good friend of mine who his dad used to be a guide out in the South Gate of Yellowstone. And so they were big game hunters, moose and elk and stuff like that. And so I got my first opportunity about 20 years ago to go on my first elk hunt. And if you've ever been elk hunting, it doesn't take much to get you hooked, chasing those guys up in the high country. And that evolved more into kind of a passion for archery. And for me, it was something that, being in the mountains in September when, the aspens are changing and things like that. I mean, it's super addicting, and to hear elk bugling and kind of the chase that goes alongside of it. And obviously the physicality portion of it, which We just actually were tracking all of our metrics from our last hunt that we just got back from, and covered 40 miles in a week and over 10 or 15,000 foot of elevation. And so we've been trying to kind of utilize what I've done now for a profession as far as strength and conditioning is done, and kind of created an offshoot in our company called Hunt, Hike, Harvest Outdoors, where I just kind of felt like it was a good space for me to utilize what I do for a living and kind of apply it to what I like to do as a passion, and something that is a little bit different, but at the same time has some opportunities there that are really been kind of enlightening. Just as you guys know, in the strength and conditioning world, that's there's a lot of kind of infighting and systems based guys, and everyone kind of elbowing their way around for territory within the strength and conditioning world. And we've been just pleasantly surprised that kind of our venture into that side of it on the hunting side, it's just been really inviting. It's been a lot of fun. We're working on some really cool stuff there. And at the same time, it's getting us into the outdoors more, which is awesome. And whether you're successful or not is always the challenge. And this year was definitely nothing short of that. So, but we try to capture as much of it. We try and film as much of it as we can. We're utilizing as much as kind of my strength conditioning brain can go into in terms of collecting data, utilizing stuff that I know from evidence-based side, and trying to apply it into this and bring it into that world. And so it's been a fun endeavor. We're about 3 years into it. And, the more I do, the more, kind of inroads that we're making, and hopefully at some point, who knows, maybe a guy might make $1 in there somewhere.
Yeah. Are you trying to get more and more people involved so you can capture and track more data?
Yeah. I actually just got off a phone call before we jumped on here. We're in the process of our second iteration of an event that we started last year. We partnered with a group called Western Hunt Fest. And the really cool part about that was we met them at a different archery event last summer at Total Archery Challenge, which is held throughout the country. There's tons of them. It's a lot of fun. And they were starting an event that really kind of fit us perfectly in that they're having a scenario-based, kind of real-world-based 3D archery shoot. There's an elk calling contest that's involved with that, and then they actually have a pack-out challenge. And so that's kind of where we came into play, where it's a simulation-based kind of event where either an individual or a team of two has to pack out the equivalency of what would be an entire elk plus head and antlers over the course of, a predetermined course that we set out that was about a mile long. And it's basically about 250 pounds that they have to carry from start to finish, either solo or with a partner, and do it as fast as they can. And then for us, we started kind of tracking the metrics with that, what was the load that they took per trip, what was the speed, and then we're trying to enhance that into doing some other stuff where we want to try and add real-time data to that, and heart rate work, and put a lot more kind of research in our head behind how we can bring some of that information and use it as a way not only to give people kind of an experience to see what it's actually like to do that, because it's super, super challenging, but at the same time, utilize that to collect data and then share it back to the community. So we're going to be instituting that this next coming season. We're actually expanding and going to do one in New Mexico right now is targeted, and then another one in Colorado again. And then hopefully at some point we're planning on expanding that into Montana too. So
what, how are you collecting the data, and also what are the problem that you're trying to solve? I know when we venture into something new, I always look at it from what's the problem I'm trying to solve? What's the solution I'm offering? And more importantly,
Sure.
what are what's the audience clamming for? I know in the hunting stuff, probably a lot of guys have 9-to-5 jobs, and hunting is not a full-time endeavor. So,
Right.
I mean, they probably don't train enough and probably aren't fit enough. And then all of a sudden it's hunting season and they want to go 100 miles an hour. And, who knows, some guy has a heart attack or, injuries or overuse. And so I'm wondering, what's the problem? And I mean, is it a Garmin type of deal where you're collecting data with, wearables and whatnot?
Yeah. So, I mean, the wearables piece obviously fits into that. I think there's some layers and levels to it. If we get down and really want to kind of dig into it, I mean, ideally for us, what we do in-house, like in our facility here at FAST, is we have a metabolic lab. And so if we can actually get people into the lab, we like to put them through like a functional threshold for power test, which allows us to then figure out like where can they operate kind of maximally in order to maintain like maximal aerobic speed or whatever that might look like, so that you don't get into this kind of like, going 100 miles an hour and doing kind of like the tortoise and the hare, where you've got to, stop and start and stop and start and try to utilize that information and provide that back to them to say, hey, we know if you stay within, this heart rate range that you can continue to move, right? And so some of the other challenges with that obviously are altitude. If we don't have raw data on people, I think that the thing that we're trying to do is figure out like, give people an exercise and understanding like what that actually feels like. Cause like, again, if you haven't done that, it's super taxing. We know through literature and some research out there that, a difficult day on the mountain, guys may have expenditures up to like 7,000 calories in a day. And so, for us, it's trying to utilize as much of that data as we can. And we're working with a company called BioStrap. And BioStrap has some phenomenal capabilities in terms of their sensors. And what they're able to do is track everything, our heart rate variability. They actually are partnered with one of the biggest sleep research companies in the world. So there's some information there that we're trying to collect as well. There's some implications as far as like what sleep does at altitude. And so, for us, it's taking all of those pieces in as much as we can, and then trying to deliver them back to people so that you're kind of preparing them, or at least giving them better ammunition for them to understand a little bit better what they're either going to embark upon, or if they want to take it to a higher level, be able to dial that in even to a much better understanding of how can I operate better? Because as I said, over the course of, most guys are going to hunt for 5, 6, 7 days in the high country. And, there's guys I know that are upwards of putting on 100 miles in a week. And so, it's tough when you look at that and say, well, this is a marathon and not a sprint. How do I make sure that, as I go through day 1 all the way out to day 8, 9, or even more, I've got buddies that were out like 16 days in the month of September, and being able to just, be able to put your boots on every day and continue, trekking the mountains. So.
Wow. No, last elk hunt I went on was in California. A buddy of mine has a ranch there, and I was able to pull a Thule elk. And,
yeah, those are awesome.
Man, we chased those elk for 3 days through the mountains, and I couldn't get within a quarter mile of them. I mean, like like there was no coverage, like there was nowhere to stalk. It was basically like hills. Like we'd hear them, we'd take off running, get to the next hill, and they'd be on the next one. We'd take off running, and they'd be at the next one. And it was finally on the 4th day. The guy who I was hunting with was like, we're not going to get close for arrow. So I pulled out a gun and ended up getting a nice shot on one from one hillside to the next.
Hey,
and
right. First elk I ever shot was with a rifle. So.
Oh man, I had all these visions of grandeur of like taking this thing with a bow, and I didn't even get within like sniffing distance of these things. And the shot that
out there.
Yeah. It's all rolling hills, and then I think the shot from one hill to the next, I think was like 500 yards, but it was also a 300 Win Mag, which was fine. And they were like, oh, ethical shots, but I'm like, dude, 300 Win Mag's good to far. But I mean, that was as close as we could get.
Yeah, and, I mean, they're amazingly intelligent animals, and at the same time, we always say, if an elk's walking away from you, you could run and still not catch it. Just because of how much ground they cover. There's some interesting kind of information about elk, as far as just even their makeup, like elk are the fastest reproducing, I think, animal in terms of blood. And so even when you see, we've had elk that we've harvested before, and, you find broadheads in them and stuff like that, and they're still running running the country as if they're perfectly fine. It's absolutely amazing. And obviously nobody wants to do that, but unfortunately, it's what we call it, hunting and not killing. And it's probably, unfortunately.
Well, explain the experience in different states, because in Texas, it's private land, leases, you sit in the blind, you drink whiskey. It's not very physically active.
Well, Texas is interesting because only 3% of the land here in Texas is public land. So which is crazy because in California, it's all public land, right? And then I'm sure in other places, but to be able to hunt here, you have to, know somebody or know the lease. And they have these high fence farms down here where I joke that basically the best luck you have is putting peanut butter on the barrel. And then just kind of like putting it out and waiting for the deer or whatever it is to come up and lick it off the barrel, and then they shoot them. So it's
we have a
it's not like that where you guys are at.
No, one of our sponsors is actually Numa Outdoors, and they're based out of Texas. They also own Los Cazadores down there, and it's funny that the CEO of the company has talked about actually because there's elk in Texas as well, and he's talked about actually shooting an elk on private ground and ended up killing it on a golf course.
Well, there's all those monster elk in the high country in Arizona and New Mexico. So I would imagine that they, obviously elk aren't necessarily too focused on state line, but I know that that western part of Texas, when you get out there on the border of, New Mexico, I'm sure there's, ample.
Oh yeah. And the job that the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has done in terms of expansion of elk in North America is astounding. I mean, right now I think there's something 10,000 head or more in Kentucky now, and in Michigan, and as I mentioned, growing up in Nebraska, Nebraska has a once in a lifetime tag, and the elk that are there that are now running cornfields and stuff like that are astronomical. I know someone who shot just the week that we were out, his kid drew the tag and shot almost a 400-inch elk in Nebraska. Wow. And so they find their way into whatever country they want. They don't necessarily just exist in the high country now, and which is good. But a lot of those states obviously are a lot more difficult to actually be able to hunt them. Again, private land, tag availability, and that's why Colorado's so difficult. Just from that perspective, is Colorado's kind of realistically the go-to destination because it's the easiest place to get a tag, and we have the highest number of over-the-counter, out-of-state, non-resident people that come to Colorado to hunt elk because you don't need a ton of preference points or things like that exist in a lot of states in order to be able to just go hunt. And the amount of public land is probably, I would assume, or I think based on everything that I know is probably the highest as well, which is fine. We always say you're not hunting hunters, you're hunting elk, and the people that are successful typically put in more work and get a few ridges deeper than the guy that's not willing to get off his ATV. So
yeah, my next door neighbor when I lived in California, he was owned a huge fish company, fishing, Angel Ocean Seafood. And one of his distillery or processing plants was up in Oregon. And one of his boat captains, who I ended up becoming friends with, those guys hunted all of Oregon. And the pictures of the Roosevelt elk that those guys hunted were absolutely insane. But also
those are the biggest.
Yeah, but if you see the terrain at which they hunt, it's like 45-degree vertical mountains up and down. I mean, the video of those guys hunting those things,
it's gnarly.
It's that to me is by far the most demanding terrain that I've ever seen for those guys. And then once they kill it, to be able to pull these things out and pack it out, I mean, just like the toughness and the capacity and just like the grit of these dudes was just something I was like, man, that's legit.
We always say when the fun is done, the work begins with elk hunting, because as soon as an elk hits the ground, the work actually starts. So,
well, you got to quarter it, you got to get it out, and you're not leaving that big rack out behind. So, I mean, it's a lot of work, but yeah, it's always impressive. I mean, for those guys, what they'll do is they'll go out in teams of 5, and they kind of pick ahead of time who's the shooter, and then they got 4 other dudes to help get it all together, because these things are, I don't even remember. I mean, they're 1,000+ pounds, and they got to be able to get these things processed and get them out in time. So pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's amazing for me when you kind of look at like the general hunting, and actually I had a good conversation with Bert Soren about this. He's like, the amount of available resources that the individuals that are into hunting have, from not only gear that they wear, but also the equipment and this and bows. And he's like, when you look at this, like the available income that these individuals have to actually go out and be proficient at hunting, he goes, there's a huge, very deep market in this. And being able to work an intelligent strength conditioning program into these individuals is something that we've been approached a million times on. The one hard thing is a lot of people sell this kind of, and because you deal in the same deal, like playing football. The only sport specific training I did involved a football or pads or hitting. Everything else was this large block GPP training. Anything I did in the weight room, anybody that starts selling sport specific training in the confines and the walls of within a training facility, it never really gelled for me. So I know in the hunting stuff, there's kind of this old school idea of like, you just got to go out there and pack and, go out there and just, put yourself through it. And while I believe that's important in one piece in the training, there's also a big strength component and the idea of like durability and making sure that you're strong under load. And can you get a little bit into what your approach is, and more importantly, how you're working to kind of change the paradigm from that traditional, just go out and pack a heavy pack for hours?
Yeah. I think that the interesting part with that is what I've found, especially as you're trying to add some meat to it, which is, more than just sets and reps and just, let's lift weights and get strong. And I need to be in better shape, whatever shape means, right? To whoever the individual looks like. I mean, that's a very broad term, right? I tell people fat people finish marathons all the time. So,
well, I always say whenever people say I'm trying to work myself into shape, I'm like, well, I mean, there's good round shapes. I've seen a lot of pear shapes.
Exactly. So, but I think that the interesting part for me is a lot of the research and things like that I draw from, interestingly enough, a lot of it realistically comes from looking at the tactical space and, looking at, guys like 10th Mountain guys and high altitude soldiers and things like that, where, most of those individuals are going to have gear on, they're going to have a kit on. And there's a lot of research that's based from that realm, that basically what I've done is try to take that and just, more or less spin it in, just a different color of the brush stroke into what that looks like from a hunting perspective. Because, my day pack is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 pounds when I get all of my stuff, into it and take off on foot. Looking at specific altitudes, that you're going to have deprivations that exist with that. And then you can start to look at what your output is going to look like, right? Like, what's a typical day? And if you're planning, obviously you can kind of predict some of those things. But at the same time, some of the other things that come into play are looking at, rucking protocols and stuff like that, and understanding that being on uneven surfaces is going to be almost, just a given. And so the resiliency factor, as you kind of mentioned, especially when you look at like foot and ankle and those types of things, and building up some tolerance from that perspective, because those are things that, if you train traditionally, which is perfectly fine, mentioning, general prep and obviously that stuff's important, and we don't, discount those things. But as we start to get a little bit closer to, the actual event, we look at doing things on uneven surfaces like lunge patterns and step up patterns, where we're downhill, we're side hill, we're inverted, we're everted, and those types of things, in order to try and give a little bit more of an atmosphere that is going to at least give, not necessarily replication, but some dosage of stuff that's going to be more like what they are going to, have to encounter when they get out there. And then structurally, I look at having a pack on every day, right? And you're going to have it on for hours and hours. And so, we look at what's going to be important in terms of posture, right? Like, what's their posture look like? How's their integrity in terms of being able to, hold and withstand that without breaking down, or, back issues, and, what's their pelvis position look like? Teach them how to, even, how to load their pack appropriately. People have horrendous packs and things like that they, aren't fitted for appropriately, that over time, it's kind of like, as Chris knows, my presentation at TSAC this year was, build more calluses and less blisters. And, kind of the nuance behind that is if we do things poorly, or if we do things without context of what our end goal is, when you compound those over thousands and thousands of foot strikes and day after day after day, and we do them from poor positions, or if we aren't structurally sound, things are going to eventually pop up and we're going to break down. And to me, like, that's the mission with how I try to get people to understand that in order for us to not only, being successful on a hunt has a lot of different, I think, kind of interpretations. Obviously, filling tags and accomplishing the goal is one thing, but at the same time, you also, it's a vacation, right? For everybody. It's something that they do every year and look forward to, and you want them to enjoy that experience. And if the whole thing resides around survival and misery, then, odds are, even though some people may like that and feed off of it, which is perfectly fine.
I mean, we used to run CrossFit gyms. I mean, dude, I used to watch people come in and get absolutely fucking murdered. And then the comment would be like, great, what time tomorrow? And I'm like, these people are twisted up. So I mean, there is a section of the population, the closer they get. My biggest issue isn't necessarily those individuals. It's the individual who hasn't trained, who, has to build the aerobic base. It doesn't have the capacity, who, goes and buys a, $600 pair of boots and, only wears them once and then thinks he's going to show up and go 16 days, and like, that's where, that's where I get a little nervous, especially with some older guys. Because, I mean, dude, it's extremely physically demanding. We had Aaron Schneider on the podcast. And, I mean, he's like, the amount of times I've pissed blood and just kind of went through. I mean, he's on the extreme end of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
High altitude.
From Kufaru?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
next level.
Yeah, he's an absolute psychopath, which fucking I absolutely loved. Yeah, he's great.
He's awesome.
But like, we gravitate towards that more extreme nature. And that's something where, and dude, the amount of emails that I've gotten where people are like, hey, I've booked this hunt and I have X amount of time to get ready. My question has always been like, okay, what does the training look like? Where are you in this whole scheme? You're telling me you're working, 50 hours a week behind a desk and only getting 1 day a week. Like, I don't know in good conscience 1 day a week is going to prepare you for the demands of what you signed up for. So I think balancing like the realistic aspect, and then also the physicality of hunting with a bow is so much different than a rifle. Whereas I feel like, you pack in with a rifle and, if you got, a legit gun, I mean, you can take some decent shots. Whereas with the bow, I mean, 60, 80 yards. I'm pretty consistent at 60. 80's pretty not that consistent for me. I mean, but 40
60 is my effective range.
Yeah, like 40 to 60 is kind of my gold standard.
I prefer 15.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw Bert posted. Bert had an amazing shot at 80, which I don't know if I would take an 80 shot. I mean, but on elk, which is a huge body, I mean, I heard that. I mean, when he posted that, I was like, shit, dude, that's a hell of a shot. Like, 40 to 60 is kind of my stretch, but also, he shoots his bow every day and the amount of training he does and the hunts and the archery things. So, I mean, he's doing all the things that he's supposed to prepare him to take that. So how do you, how do you get people started? How do you balance them? How do you breathe that sensibility into individuals? Because I think most people overreach. I mean, we see it all the time within our own training programs. A lot of people, when they start, are overreaching. And as my dad used to say sometimes, so just a funny note, we had a birthday party. My dad's passed away, but we had a birthday party, and we were sitting there having margaritas, and my adopted brother, Steve-O, has a heady hand, so he overpours my dad. And my dad started kind of making an ass of himself, and so my mom got pissed at him, and the next day he calls me and is like, hey, was I acting stupid? I'm like, a little bit. He's like, well, your mother's mad at me. He's like, it looks like the 20-year-old got the 70-year-old in trouble. So he's like, in my head, I'm still in my 20s, but all of a sudden, that kid inside's getting me in trouble. So I imagine a lot with the hunting, a lot of people are like, hey, I used to be able to do this, or I hunted a lot, and now life's gotten in the way. So I'm wondering, what's the reacclimation, re-releasing them into the wild in such a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of parallels where, as you guys know, unfortunately, you're not going to reach them all. You have to at least have people that are captive and engaged enough that want to, embark on that and commit some reasonable time in order to prepare, right? Like, I'm not a miracle worker, like I'm sure you guys know, and so I think if you can get people to understand a little bit more, right, which is giving them some of that information that we talked about, right? Like this, if they don't know, it's, hey, here's what you can expect, right? Like on an average, right? Like if you know where maybe they're targeting to go, being able to look at that area and say, well, this is what the terrain looks like. This is more than likely what you're going to probably need to expect to cover, on an average daily basis. Looking at where they're coming from, and I'll give you an example. I had a guy who drew about a 15-year tag in New Mexico this year, but lived in Florida, and he's like, "This is the hunt I've been waiting for a decade and a half." And so I kind of started putting him on the path, and it wasn't that he didn't understand, like, oh, I have no clue what I'm getting myself into, but it was more of me asking the right questions to figure out, like, where are you going? Look at what the average altitude is at that space. Understand that there's no way he can replicate that altitude in Florida, of all places.
It's a little
right?
flat.
It's a little flat, right? I'm like, do you have anything that resembles a hill? He's like, kind of, And so it started from, very general based stuff, and then gradually ramping him up to the point of getting him to build out that kind of window of what his resiliency looked like from, a strength perspective, from an endurance perspective, and then obviously cardiovascularly, and trying to utilize that as a way to, slowly introduce him into, this is what it's going to feel like on a day-to-day basis, and increasing his volume and increasing his frequency and things like that as he got closer and closer to it, because, at that point he was going to be pretty much all in. So I think that the more times than not, when I can ask the right questions to kind of figure out, like, what's your goal here? What are you expecting? What do you know? And maybe they know nothing, right? I mean, I see all the time, like, we're parts of all different types of forums and things like that. And you see people all the time like, hey, I'm targeting my first elk hunt 2 years from now. Can I have some help? And that's great. I mean, you get a lot of those people. And so I think the more that we can provide them with kind of the expectation and what they're going to be kind of up against, so to speak, and then backfill that with saying, well, here's a good starting point for you, and then try to get them to, buy into it. I mean, I think that's always been how I kind of approach it. And, at some people it's more fine tuning, and other people it's, basically throwing them into the deep end of the pool. So you just never know. Everybody's different.
Well, so like if somebody comes to you and they do have, let's say, 2 years from an elk, like, where do you start? Is it with like, hey, like, here's the baseline, we need to get some wearables, and then kind of the basic kind of Milo's bowl, where, you're going to pick something up small, and as over the course of the 2 years, it's going to increase in intensity and hopefully periodize you for that exact moment, and try to replicate it as much as we can, 1 to 2 days a week. And then kind of as you get closer to it, kind of add a little bit more.
Yeah. I think, I mean, if you had that much time, I mean, the world's your oyster. I mean, at that point, it's like, obviously, strength and those types of things, you look at that from a very longitudinal process, right? But I always say that from the conditioning or the metabolic side of things, I mean, that's a relatively short window. And so if you have that much time, it's building general into gradually getting to be more specific. And so, if you actually had someone that was willing to invest that much time, I think that, you can get a lot accomplished. You can have them, 100% prepared. I typically try and tell people that, if they come in with any, training status whatsoever, that, about a 12 to 16 week period is typically what I look at as saying, now we've got to really narrow it down. Right. And so I think if you had that much time, you're going to work at getting them stronger. You're going to do basic stuff. You're going to do, multi-dimensional and multi-directional stuff. I think that that's the big thing that I see a lot when I get people that come to me is, and I think it's true in sport and everywhere else, where so much of our training and what people do on a day-to-day basis, unless otherwise tasked with it, is most of their workouts exist in a hallway being sagittal plane. And, I'm a huge believer that, we have to teach people to move in all directions and be much more angular and frontal plane and transverse plane, and try to add layers to that, so that when they start to get down to being more specific, that they're much more capable of handling things without falling apart. And that, to me, is the biggest factor in any training. I mean, to me, I think that's the thing that I see a lot of, and I think a lot of us, including myself, have probably fallen victim to in the course of our careers, is being too one-dimensional sometimes, and we get really myopic a lot of times in how we approach and design training programs.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's so easy just to do nothing but bilateral hip hinging in a sagittal plane, and
Right.
it's
For
simple
time.
for time.
And emotional intensity. Joel, have you ever had a client like reach out and say thank you because they out on the hunt or out on the venture, like something life-threatening happened to them, and they're like, man, I'm glad I called that guy?
I haven't had any of those where they're like, holy crap, you saved my life. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have had folks that were like, man, that helped a ton. I felt great. It really enhanced my ability, when I got to day 4 and 5 and 6 and things like that. And, I never felt like I couldn't continue to cover ground and stuff like that. I think, to me, that's probably the best, compliment, is to know that, when they got deeper into a hunt, if they haven't filled a tag, and that they're able to still get up every morning and get out and put miles on and still feel capable. I think that's the biggest thing is, if you wear down as the week goes on, the elk don't move closer to you. The more you're out there, odds are you're going to have to work harder. So, hopefully I don't ever have anybody that gets into those situations, but it happens. I mean, we've seen, instances where, I know just recently a guy, had an arrow drop out of his quiver, and he ended up literally, wedging and basically impaling himself through his calf. And like, that can be a really scary situation. And I think those are the things a lot of times that get overlooked too. And, we try to prepare for those things as much as possible. I mean, having some of that knowledge is super, super important, right? I mean, we bring stuff with us like, SAM splint, and I bring a tourniquet and quick clot and zip stitch and those types of things, because you just never know. I mean, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we were 9 miles and, from the nearest place or even vehicle, from where we're at. Something goes wrong out there, you better have some resources, or at least some basic ability to figure out how to keep yourself out of harm's way.
So what do you like for boots? I'm always fascinated by people's boot selection, because feet are so different. And I remember, actually I was talking with Bert about this, and he was going through, every pair of boot. It's kind of like concealed gun holsters almost. Yeah. Like ask anybody that carries concealed, they got a bag full of holsters that they fucking hate. Same thing with boots. I mean, it feels like if you can find a boot that fits your foot, that you can effectively wear, and like you said, create calluses so that you can go far, it feels like that to me is probably, if you can keep your feet pretty healthy, you probably have a good chance of surviving it. At least that's what I know from my own experiences.
100%. I mean, I have a little bit of a unique kind of condition with that. It took me probably 10 years to actually find a boot that really realistically worked for me. A friend of mine, him and his partner own Top Priority Hunting out of Idaho, and they're sponsored by Crispy. And he was at our facility, and he had a pair on one day, and I'm like, hey man, like, are these things all what they're cracked up to be? Because I was seeing them everywhere and everyone's ranting and raving. He's like, I promise you. He's like, they're worth every dime. And so I ended up buying a pair of Laponias, Crispy Laponias, and that year put about 60 miles on. And when I say unique circumstance, when I was younger, I'd actually broke kind of the proximal joint on my big toe, one of my big toes, and I had a window smash it. And so now it's getting to where it's pretty cranky and it doesn't like being moved around. And my range on it is actually pretty limited compared to my other one. And so when you get into contouring and uphilling and downhilling and stuff like that, in the past, I went through 2, 3, 4 different pairs of boots, and I'd get 2, 3, 4 days into a hunt, and I would almost have to take a morning off because it would just be so flared up and pissed off and painful. And once I moved to that boot, it was the first time where I hunted all week long, and actually kind of like dawned on me one day, I'm like, my toe actually feels fine. And so, for me, that was like, you got me. I'm in for, for as long as you can take my money. That's my go-to. But I do know some other guys that are big on, like Zamberlins. I know some other guys that really love Kenetrex. There's Loas, and I think there's a lot of really good options out there. But for me, for archery, that Laponia boot not only serves as the first boot that I've been able to put miles on, and I probably have 300-400 miles on those boots now, and they're still as good as new as far as, they haven't broke down. They're a little bit stiffer in the toe box, which I think is what helps from me getting a lot of that kind of like extension. And, I think that's the biggest thing, as well as the fact that they're super, super light. And to me, if you're going to put on a lot of miles, you sure the heck don't want a heavy boot. And, so that's where kind of like all of those few factors have led me to, being a big believer in them, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other good ones.
Is there a set number of miles that you recommend putting into boots? So one of our training programs, Hammer, that we push military, fire, LEO, and hunters towards, builds in rucks into the programming. Like, right. Is there an opportunity? How much miles can somebody put on their boots to realize, hey, yay or nay?
Yeah, I would say that depending upon ability to get into terrain and things like that, what you're going to actually utilize them for, I think you got to probably at least get, 5 to 10 miles in to really give yourself a good idea, especially, again, contouring and some things like that, if that's what you're going to expect to be doing, to figure out whether or not that boot's probably going to work for you. Just from the standpoint of fit, in terms of, how is it, what the sole is like, how is it in terms of, what the toe box is like, do you like it to be, are you a flat-footed, high arch person, whatever, and just go through that process. I think if you just wear them around the house for a couple days and you're like, oh yeah, these feel great. You're probably going to find out it's going to take you a few iterations before you figure out what actually works for you. So, I don't have a perfect number or a dialed in number, but I think if you'd have to at least give yourself 5 to 10 miles before you're going to know whether or not that boot, number one, breaks into kind of where you think it's actually starting to fit, and how a shoe kind of works, and with your foot, and then is it going to not create hot spots? Is it not creating pain, whether that's heel pain, midfoot, toe, whatever that might be, and go from there.
Any more hunting? We'll switch gears a little bit. Yeah, switch up. Well, fast performance. I'm curious, man. You were a coach at Denver. Is that opportunity to coach at University of Denver what brought you to the area?
Yes. That was my gateway to Denver after grad school. And
then what was the motivation? Like, hey, I'm done with college, I'm going to open up my own performance facility. Well,
there was a couple other steps that existed in there. I came to University of Denver. One of my mentors, Mike Sanders, who's now with 7th Group in Thor 3 down in Eglin, he became the head coach at the University of Denver and asked me to apply. Like, the timing of it was crazy. I finished grad school. I went through the entire interview process, still the craziest interview process I've ever been through. I had 8 phone interviews and 8 in-person interviews when I came to Denver. Managed to con all of them into hiring me, which worked out. And I spent a little over 7 years there. And kind of at that time, it was one of those things where Mark Stevenson, who I know was just beginning kind of the early phases of the TSAC kind of program. And him and Mike were really good friends. And I actually got a cold call from Jay Dawes and at that time Peter Melanson, and they were looking to replace. Oh man, his name is completely evading me right now. Someone in the education department at the NSCA, and for me, it was one of those things where I'd been in a college setting for close to 10 years at that point. I'd spent 2 years at the University of Nebraska-Kearney before that, and if you've been in those situations and what I would consider to be, that was a non-football school, very high level. I mean, we were very successful with a lot of our programs there. And but a lot of those schools get to a point where they realize that you've been capped out in terms of how much they want to pay you. And I had reached that point where I was either going to need to move on somewhere, or wait for Mike to move on. And, this opportunity came to me through the NSCA, and it was one of those where I'd kind of done a little bit of the pros and cons. And I'm like, well, I've been working on average 50 to 60 hours a week for the last 10 years with no holidays being sacred and everything else. And I can go work at the NSCA, work normal hours, expand my network, get paid more. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And so I did that. So that's why I moved from there. And then kind of concurrently in there is where I actually started my job with the Mammoth, with the Colorado Mammoth of the NLL, as you mentioned. I had some guys that were starting to kind of move on and play professionally within our lacrosse program at DU, and the previous strength coach had left, and somehow my name got thrown into that hat. And I was fortunate enough that job at that time was really seasonal, didn't require travel, anything like that. And the players could come down to DU that were in town and train with me kind of after hours type thing. And so it was like, I can make a couple extra bucks, I'll start doing that. And when I went to the NSCA, I was able to maintain that concurrently. And as kind of my time there got to a point where I was ready to move again, I kind of went back to the organization and said, hey, I need some time to kind of figure some things out. And they kept wanting me to have a bigger role. And so I kind of put it back on them and said, well, then you got to pay me more. Like, that's just all there is to it, and that was kind of my transition more into the private sector, which was I utilized that next season, which when I left the NSCA, the Mammoth season was just starting. And then I began actually traveling with the team and taking a much bigger role there. And so from there, that was where I'm like, okay, well, when the season's over, I'm going to figure what the hell I'm going to do, because I don't have a pot to piss in at this point when the season's over. And that was kind of the start of that. And that's been 7, 8, well, it's like closer to 8 or 9 years now of working through that, where I was kind of, renting space at a private gym and, and then moving until I got approached by Peter Schaefer, who's a sports agent, and he wanted me to essentially run a facility for him. And that kind of kickstarted where we are today. And my business partner now, him and I kind of merged our two businesses. And then I pulled another colleague of mine, John Cole, in to create what is now Fast Performance. And he was at Ski and Snowboard Club Vail for like 25 years. And so it's we moved in here. We're just coming up on 3 years in this facility. And so it's been a lot of trial and error, and we screw it up a lot, but we're I don't know, the doors are still open, and I think the bills are paid. So, we're continuing on as well as we can.
Yeah. Who makes up the majority of your clientele? Is it teens training for performance? You got pros coming in there for combine, group classes?
Yeah, we've done, I've done probably 4 or 5 combine classes. I don't work quite as closely as I used to with agents. I had a huge desire for that years ago, and it's a fun process, the combine process, but at the same time, it's exhaustive. Talking about working 60 hours in a college setting, my combine season typically was as the Mammoth season started as well, and my 50 to 60 turned into 80 to 90 during the first like 2.5, 3 months of the year. And so as much as I enjoyed it, I don't have a lot of emphasis there. I mean, we still obviously get some pro guys in here. A big part of our business is our baseball side that Jason Hirsch runs. He's former big leaguer, he's a second round pick from the Astros. And we have every bit of tech that Major League Baseball has, you know, in our facility in terms of pitching and hitting and analytics and all that kind of stuff. It's like, I played college baseball and it's like far surpassed my understanding. But so we get a lot of baseball clientele in here, and then obviously our lacrosse is also a pretty big influence. But you know, I've got soccer players in here right now. I've got, you know, a guy that's actually just getting ready to he's taking his PT test this week. He's wants to become a combat controller. So you know, we've got a little bit of everything, and we're you know, as you guys know, when you're in this space, like I don't turn down a whole lot of people if they're willing to come in and you know, embark on our services and put in the work.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I try to explain to somebody, we're into training or building projects. You know, if somebody comes to me with a specific need and I can fill that need, it doesn't matter how they're porting it out. And it's more about like helping them on their journey and, you know, fixing things and finding people within the expertise. So I think people get stuck in these veins, and I'm like, I'm more into training athletes. And if there's something unique that you need that I fit for that service, then shit, man, we go 100 miles an hour at it.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite clients right now that I work with, not that I have clients I hate or anything right now.
Be honest.
As far as they know.
Yeah. And they don't listen to this podcast.
Yeah. They'll never listen to this. At the end of just here a couple of months ago, I started working with a retired NFL guy, and met him through Jesse Erlinger, who owns Breath Belt. And they were buddies. They both played at Miami. And he's like, hey, man, he's like, you training like old broken down guys? And I'm like, yeah, sure, dude. And, you know, he's trying to ward off his second knee replacement. And like, man, working with him is awesome. You know, obviously.
Who's this? Because I know Jesse.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm an old broken down NFL player. I mean, that's what I did for 10 years of my life.
Casey Jones.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, played for the Broncos. He was on their 2 Super Bowl teams with Elway.
Yeah,
just a great dude. A lot of fun, and you know, we've got him back to a healthier point, and like he's one of those guys. Like every day you show up, you're like, this can be a good hour. You know?
Yeah. No. I remember he played in. He was offensive lineman though, right?
Yeah, he was a center.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Beast.
Yeah.
Played with like Ray Lewis and The Rock and all those guys. Like. Those are some fun. Those are some offline stories I would love. We can share. I asked him. I said, "Hey man, you know that 30 for 30 or whatever it was about the U?" I'm like, "How true is that?" And he's like, "What parts?"
Well, he would have been. He would have played at the Broncos when like Mark Schlereth and some of those guys were there. So Dave Diaz. So when I was a young rookie playing for the Eagles, I came in. I got drafted in '99. You know, we were super young.
Right around the same time.
Yeah, so we were super young, and they brought in all these old vets, and one of them was Dave Diaz-Infante, who had played for the Broncos, and Dave was kind of like the old, you know, now I laugh at him, he's only in his 30s. I thought he might have been like 400 years old, and now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, fuck Dave, fucking Diaz. Yeah, so like, you know, as a young guy going to the Super Bowl, we'd go down there and hanging out with Mark Schlereth, and those dudes was really cool because I had seen those guys play as a kid. And like as I was coming up in college, like seeing them play, so it was always neat to like get a chance to hang out with those guys, especially as a young guy. And now that I'm old, I'm like, oh yeah.
Casey Jones, he's from Midland, so that's the Friday Night Lights movie, based in that area.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's if you go to, we had him and Jesse. Jesse was in town. We actually had him on our podcast, and there's a really amazing story where he tells on the podcast how he became the captain at the University of Miami, and it involves Ray Lewis, which is just, it's an absolutely
talk about a teaser.
Was the only one who didn't have, wasn't in the, probably like the felony court system. So they're like, hey, he doesn't have a felony coming up, so we'll make him the head captain.
No, it involved, basically the gist of it is that they would line him and Ray up day after day because the coaches just love seeing him and Casey go at it. And
was it in a dance competition? So like with Ray's dancing.
No. Yeah.
So dude, when we would go down and play Baltimore, I fucking hated playing down in Baltimore because it took 20 minutes to start the game while they let Ray Lewis do a stupid fucking dance to the point where I used to talk so much shit to him and be like, what are you going to fucking dance the entire time? And dude, but they loved it, man. Dude, you guys remember that dance?
Oh yeah.
The fucking, first of all, yeah, like the way it works in the NFL is every other game it switches who gets, gets to get their names called out. So on away games, they always introduce the offense. At home, it was always the defense, so Ray could do his dance. And we were like,
I've seen it live. I went to Baltimore Texans playoffs 2012, and I sat right there.
Yeah, and you're like,
well, they got their asses kicked, but damn, just
yeah,
it was cool.
Well, it's actually an awesome story. Basically, the gist of it is that Casey sees Ray in a scrimmage, like coming down the line, and Casey sees him out of the corner of his eye, and he doesn't think Ray knows that, he's expecting him, and Ray's going to try and clean him out. And Casey turns right as he approaches him and just hammers him. And in one fell swoop, grabs Ray's face mask and rips it completely off his helmet. Mm. Yeah. And he goes, you want to see a guy immediately go just completely like, oh shit, what do I do now? And he goes, Ray goes storming off. He's just irate. And then Casey has like a cousin that was an athletic trainer on the team, and he, gets done. That's back when the guys just banged every day, right? Like, practices and stuff. Says, I'm sitting in my locker, and he's like, I'm dog tired. And my cousin comes over. He's like, bro, Ray's going to kill you. Like, he's so fucking mad. And he's like, he goes, like when a room just kind of goes silent and there's this uneasiness, he's like, I could tell Ray had just walked in. I'm like, here we go. And Ray walks over and he's like, well, let's get it over with. He stands up and Ray holds out his hand and says, hey man, I'm sorry. I won't ever let that happen again. Mm. And he goes, that's how I became the captain of Miami.
Nice. Nice. No,
it was him or Ray.
You're gonna laugh at this, but I always enjoyed playing against Ray Lewis, and the reason being is Ray was always looking for a highlight film. So the way he made his bones and the way he made his money was putting those two big fat offense or D linemen in front of him, like Saragusa, God rest his soul. And then what he would do is he would stay real tight, and he knew that those dudes were going to take up two dudes, and then he would scrape off because he always wanted to hit against a linebacker or a fullback or whatnot. Sure. We went down in preseason. And they actually came out in the 34 defense, and it was the first time I was playing left guard. I got down in my stance, and I could see Ray. I was looking right at him, like eye to eye, and I'm like, they must be fucking misaligned. I've never in my life been able to look at this dude because he was always cheating behind those big dudes. And we came off, ran his zone, and I got actually my first chance to one-on-one hit him because he had to legitimately try to two-gap me, so he couldn't pick a side. And got a nice hit on him, tea-kettled him. And he was fucking going crazy. They never came out in that 3-4 again. So, he loved hitting against backs. I mean, he even told me one time, he was like, I ain't trying to fucking hit you. I'm trying to hit those little dudes so I can make a highlight film. And I was like, I respect that. I mean, he knew it. And he was the master of... Oh, yeah, but he was also the master of mic me up. I'm going to say some crazy shit. I mean, he played the game the way it should have been played. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's good though. I'm glad that you're taking on projects and fixing old broken offensive linemen. It's a much needed deal.
I'll take them all.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's we met Jesse from Breath Belt actually at Sornex, and he was came over and talked about his breath belt, and it was wild because the first time I put it on, I knew exactly what he was trying to do. I mean, it's something that we teach with our dead bug and a lot of our movement stuff of keeping this, compressed, kind of hollowed out, pull your top rib down. And I thought it was so ingenious that he created a belt that was actually showing people the position that we had been fighting to teach people. So now I know for my wife. We live next door to a riding school. And so my wife trains a bunch of the girls and moms that ride. And the first thing she does is put them in a breath belt to try to teach them that position, because she said that she can actually, when she puts the breath belt on and gets them into the right position, she's like, this is how I want you to stay all the time. It's night and day different, to the point where some of the ladies, I think she bought 10 of them, and a bunch of ladies ride horses with them with it on. Mm-hmm. And so they can hold their position better. So, I mean, Jesse's done some amazing stuff.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, it's become something that, I mean, I use almost daily, where even at times when, I'm at my desk, or even now, it's like I'm sitting down here and even just talking about this, I'm like, as soon as I get done, I'm probably going to go throw it on when my next session starts. And it's just a great tool that, I think he's just scratching the surface. And I talked to Jesse quite a bit. In fact, I got to call him this week, but all the right intentions, and just a great simple tool that has so many uses. So yeah.
Well, McQuilkin's wearing a set of Spanx right now, so he likes to wear Spanx around.
Breath Spanx.
Similar.
Yeah, that's the evolution of the breath belt. Is just full Spanx.
It's just full Spanx. Dude. Dude.
Yeah, make sure. We'll call Jesse about that one later this week.
Some guy tagged me in something. So we have within our power athlete ecosystem, a bunch of our Block 1 coaches like constantly tag me in shit. And somebody tagged me. I think it might have been Tyson Shumway. And these people were actually selling like a shirt, and I think it was like shorts for you to like. Effectively, they were men's Spanx. Where like, you basically was like hoist your gut into it and it pulls it in, and then you pull this shirt down and kind of attach it. Yeah. And he's like, like, what do you think about? Oh, dude, he tagged me in it like, hey, is there a training application towards this? And my comment is like, no, those people need training so that this isn't how they fucking, get up in the morning. Like, oh, instead of getting in better shape, I'm just going to Kim Kardashian this fucking sausage casing.
It's a bro set, like a core set for bros.
Dude, it looks so uncomfortable.
It hurts to be beautiful, quoting Mel Hinsman. This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
So it's true. Mel did say that. As somebody who wore white spandex almost every day of their life for almost 20 years, I can tell you that basically being stuffed into a sausage casing on Sundays, like there is no part of that I want today, to the point where like if something's like overly fitted, I'm like, I'm good. I'm not going to wear this.
Nah.
Like compression shorts, I'm like, no, I'm not going to wear them. Like any type of spandex shirt, I'm like, nope, I'm not going to wear it.
Wranglers, count me in.
Oh yeah, like super tight jeans. I got to have jeans with spandex. If the jeans are too tight, I'm like, ooh, these are too tight. I can't wear these. My wife's like, didn't you wear tight clothes? I'm like, yeah, but I didn't like any bit of it.
Glutes got to pop. Well, Joel,
nothing but fashion.
Yeah, Fast Performance. What's cool is you host a lot of educational seminars, experiences, different groups, and a CA for the TSAC and Kaisers coming into your location, which is pretty awesome. That's unique. So we've had the opportunity to travel the world and visit a lot of gyms and speak with a lot of gym owners, and they're sometimes very protective of their ecosystem and their athletes and their environment. What motivates you to bring these experts in to teach at your facility?
Because they're all smarter than me.
Easy enough.
I mean, that's somewhat in a lot of ways true. I mean, we're very fortunate. Like our facility is 12,000 square feet, which obviously there's bigger facilities and there's smaller facilities, but in terms of just the layout of our space, as I mentioned, kind of being in our room here, we built out this room as far as podcasts like you guys obviously have as well. You one up me, but we'll let that go.
Well, we could, like I'll send you the recipe for hammers. If you want to put a bunch of hammers on the back wall, I mean, you got the wood.
I could use a couple of those at the house for sure. I got a lot of projects, but, and then, we have a metabolic lab that, again, JC works a lot on our strategic partnerships. So, we've got Watt Bike in there. We've got the core temperature sensor. We've been working with those guys out of Europe. We've been using Trainer Roads, Training Peaks, all that kind of stuff as far as some of the tech that are BioStrap. And so we've got a lot of capability from there. Obviously, the training space, I always say, people walk in like, oh yeah, your training space is like, it's super nice and everything. I'm like, it's a weight room, like the goal of the weight room is to be functional. whatever, yeah, sure, we want it to look nice, we want it to look inviting, and we want to sell it to people, but that's probably the least sexy as far as a lot of those things go. We're lucky that we have a massage therapist on staff, we have a sports psychologist on staff, and then we also built out an actual we have a space in our facility that will hold about 30 to 40 people that we built out strictly as an educational conference room for doing seminar work and things like that, which for us, it's just, we've always felt JC is huge on the educational side, as well as I've always been, that if we can create a place that, is a hub, is a source, is something where, we can spread, share, and produce opportunities for people to learn, for people to network. We're getting ready to come up on our Mountain Con event that JC brought down from Vail. That's a super unique event where we're bringing folks in from all over the place that are involved in high altitude and alpine sports and things like that are kind of specialized into that environment. And we've added things like when the first 2 years that JC held that event, it included mountain biking and kayaking and actually stand-up paddleboarding and things like that, where, just to come in and sit in front of a screen for a couple of days, I think that those days are maybe long gone as far as being dry and boring and whatever. And so we're trying to create more of an enriched environment where people not only get to meet other people, but, create experiences that are expanded beyond, literature and just spewing out a bunch of PowerPoints over a couple of days. And so that's kind of where our genesis of a lot of that stuff comes from. And, to me, I always look at those things as opportunities to, expand my knowledge base, to learn from other people, to get more people that come through our doors, and hopefully at some point it benefits not only us as a business, but, a lot of other people, and that we can be a place where people will look to, or at least resource for stuff that, I've always said I've never invented anything in this industry. And I kind of chuckle a little bit about, guys that create, as you've kind of talked about and mentioned, and we've talked about here, that, have this like, oh, this is our system and whatever else. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's still moving weight in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different directions. And if you want to call it that, that's fine. But, maybe I'm just a poor marketer, which obviously I am.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's nothing for me to share anything that I do with anyone. And if it helps somebody, then that's great.
Yeah. Now we always like, oh, you lift weights too?
Yeah.
And like you do some hard stuff. You do a little bit. I mean, like it's like whenever, like unless it's completely off the wall, like who is Archuleta's dude in Arizona?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
God, I'm fucking blanking on his name.
Throw a barbell.
Was it Schrader?
Yeah, Jay Schrader, where you're hooking people up to a machine that you built in your garage, and you're doing fucking ballistic weight drops on a machine you built off of like 10 stories down to try to kill them. I mean,
I'm good on that.
I talked to Jay on the phone, and he got into like a little bit of their tech and like the machines he was designing in his garage in terms of like the it wasn't EMF or EMS, but they were other kind of like I mean, it was like. And what's wild is like the stuff was so off the wall, and it was so proprietary that like even if he told me everything, I couldn't go replicate it because one, I don't have the electrical engineering background to build his technology, and I'm not going to take the time to like develop schematics. So I mean, like, and even like even if the guy gave me a recipe, like I'd be like, here it is, go do it. So I mean, like even with that stuff, like super guarded, and
that's a good move though. Over explain it to the point where even you're confused. They can't replicate it.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, like common principles, like we talk about compensatory acceleration. That one discussion I had when I was 14 years old, I believe was one of the foundations for why I was able to play a decade in the NFL. As mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. Like that. I mean, Fred Hatfield. I mean, he's like the amount of people when we discuss that with people, they have never heard about it, and I just so happened the old powerlifter that trained me with buddies with Fred Hatfield, and he talked about try to break the weights, try to move these motherfuckers as fast as possible. So when you go out there
100%.
on in the game, this is the way you've trained. This is effectively how you'll play, and like that little piece, was huge for me. Like Charlie Francis's med ball stuff for not only adductors and trunk and throws and. I mean, all that stuff was so fundamental. I mean, there are these pieces, and I talk about it constantly. Like, these are the things that helped me play a decade and we use with our athletes. Whether or not people choose to
Yeah.
replicate them or not, that's upon them to go and learn it from the source.
Yeah, we have a 17-foot banner in our facility that says "Train fast, be fast." You know, that's kind of a big Kaiser piece, and you know, the Kaiser's been awesome for us. Not that I'm, you know, tooting their horn or anything. We obviously, you know, there's a lot of ways you can skin a cat in terms of the training world, but you know, the microcosm of that is that, you know, I grew up in, as I mentioned, in Nebraska, right? It was like bigger, faster, stronger. You know, it was the old school Boyd Epley, you know, where it was squat, bench, clean, deadlift, you know, and that was what was ingrained into me as a, you know, college athlete, as a high school athlete and stuff like that. And, you know, over time, there was this like dawning realization to me, like when I was working with college football players, and I'm like, why does the dude that, you know, led the team in squat max sitting on the bench on Saturdays? Like, this doesn't make any freaking sense, you know? And to me, it was like, those were the things where I go, so lifting more weights is cool, but it doesn't always apply. And, you know, and so I like, that's where I think some of those things for me started to really make sense, where I'm like, we have to have an accepted relative amount of strength based on, you know, whatever the given need is. But there's very few places outside of just lifting heavy weights in order to accomplish a task to lift the most weight, where there isn't a speed component or a velocity component or something like that that's associated with being successful at a given task within the sport realm.
When I trained with Verstegen at Athletes Performance, so I lived in Newport and I drive up to Carson, we would use the Kaiser runner, and there was like a power wattage. I remember there was some form of wattage meter we had, and I think it was like a 30 or 60-second sprint intervals we would do. And I remember, God, I'm going to totally mess his name up. The one guy who was kind of my dude that trained with me was a guy named Vaso. And then there was another, and I can't remember their names, but I remember we would go bang weights and we'd squat heavy. And as I got stronger, we kept going back to the Kaiser runner to see if the power that I developed within the time periods was constant, increased, or decreased. And I remember I was pretty fortunate. As I got stronger, the power increased, whereas other people would get stronger and their power ended up decreasing. And I remember they were scratching their heads, and I'm like, well, if they're moving, you know, if the accentuation phase is slower and they're effectively not moving as violently as they could, it's going to translate. You know, we saw that in super training with, you know, what was it? A 200 kilo bench for the throwers was optimal for a 16-pound shot, whereas a 220 kilo bench ended up slowing them down and reducing the velocity on the ball. And I mean, just some basic stuff like that. If you can effectively continue to be dynamic and strong with load, you know, it'll show up in other ways. And I actually really enjoyed that Kaiser runner. Of all the Kaiser shit we used, that one is by far my favorite. And then when we were fortunate to go out and work with the guys at Development Group, their new facility, they had a string of those things. And I was like, fuck yes, let's go use these. But none of them were bolted down.
Oh, yeah.
Because nobody had been using them. So all of a sudden I get the guys in them and they start fucking going and they're smashing into the walls of the office to the point where I had like everybody standing on a corner trying to, you know, hey, like let's do some like just basic power watt output. And then we're going to go do a bunch of training. You know, we're going to see if we can get you into good trunk position. And once you maintain that trunk position, can you generate more force, and trying to just do a little test and retest. And our limiting factor was the fact that they weren't fucking bolted down, and nobody had used it. So nobody had fucking figured out that you need to bolt those motherfuckers. They'll go shooting through the wall.
Yeah, that's a word to the wise there.
I mean, they're overly complicated. They're super expensive. I remember the valves would blow, but when they worked, man, that was a fucking great tool. I always really enjoyed them. I've seen them pop up for sale periodically on like, you know, I'll see them pop up in like different ways online or different like sales, but you got to have the tech for the air. I mean, there's a lot of components going into them, but man, that was a great piece.
Yeah. We, you know, obviously we have standard weight room equipment. You know, I think for us, it was like the greatest hits piece with that, you know, for me, with the amount of hockey, baseball, lacrosse, stuff like that I deal with, golf even, you know, the functional trainer for me is like, that was the non-negotiable, you know, like I had to have that piece from a cable perspective. just because of the way that we can work in transverse plane and be able to accelerate at, effort with that, based on that pneumatic piece. And then like we have 2 of their racks, and then we have their squat machine as well. And the runner is one that like I'm working on right now to try, because that's like my last kind of like ideal piece. And then we want to add their leg press from the unilateral piece that we want to put into our lab, because JC's done a ton of that stuff with his alpine skiers, the Lindsey Vonns and Michaela Schifrins of the world and stuff like that over the years, to be able to utilize that from lower body output and power outputs. And, outside of that, it's like we still use dumbbells, we still use barbells, we see, just everything else that, a standard weight room has. But that small capability of being able to look at reps, and as you mentioned, right, like I think the objective and subjective piece of that's been probably the best part for me, where when I have an athlete, say we're doing explosive chops or something like that, being able to sit there and go like, oh, that one was better, and they're like, oh, how, right? And now I can look back at that actual information that's being given to me and go, that one was 90% of your last rep, this one was 100%, and that creates a better environment in terms of training that I've noticed a big time with a lot of our athletes. Is now they can look at it and go like, oh yeah, that was faster, rather than just like taking my word for it. I think that's been a nice addition to that piece for us. So
yeah, no, I always appreciate that equipment. I have there's certain pieces of equipment that I've coveted over the years. One of them is like a hammer iso incline. And then the other one is Hammer's kind of seated leg press, unilateral leg press. Those 2 pieces of equipment for where all the places I've trained have always been extremely beneficial for me. So we actually have them here, and there's a few others I'm always on the hunt for. They don't pop up as much as they used to.
Well, with the downslope of COVID and how much equipment got bought for home gyms and stuff like that recently, like, keep your eye out, because people are offloading now that the world is opening.
Yeah, the other one we've been playing a lot with is the flywheel. So Chris Duffin from Kabuki sent us one of their flywheel platforms, and man, I've been playing with that thing, doing like a bunch of leg extensions and just a bunch of hamstring stuff and a bunch of rows and even a bunch of curl stuff. And man, that flywheel is really cool. Like I saw somebody online has like a seated leg extension hamstring curl that's hooked up to a flywheel. It's it's kind of, I want to say it's like 6 Gs, which feels like a lot for just like a single jointed kind of that single jointed exercise. But man, so we've been doing different replications with his flywheel setup, man, and it's providing a really interesting stimulus. And I think for me, that's how do I say this? There's not too many things that come around, like new things where I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's, it's interesting. I'm going to see how that works. That flywheel, I think, has such amazing applications. And I'm really excited to use that more in my training.
I need to sell a lot more training sessions so we can buy one of those.
Check them out. There's some like platforms and some other ones, but yeah, Chris has been extremely generous and sent us. I mean, we've made a good friendship, and like, dude, he sends me stuff constantly to play with. So he's always been very, very generous with us, but he's definitely has got some amazing stuff with that transformer bar and his trap bar and also that cap. It's the gold standard. Like I haven't squatted with a standard bar on my back in almost since the day it showed up. It's such a better position, especially teaching people to engage their lats and then allowing them to sit into a better position. Like the amount of times I've had to coach somebody to squat well with a bar, and then I can put somebody in that and almost just hack the situation, and instantly they squat better. I'm like, God damn it. Like this should be prerequisite for everybody.
Yeah, that I know. We're huge fans of those guys too. I mean, we're same for us, right? Like the trap bar and the transformer. I mean, those are just they get used daily around here.
Yeah, they become staples for us too.
All right, last few questions here, Joel. Centered around lacrosse. I'm a Division III All-Star, but the weight room provided me the opportunity to play, so I got to give back. And you had the opportunity to work with a premier. Denver University, or is it University of Denver? I think I fucked that up earlier.
University of Denver.
UD squad, and they won the national. Were you with the championship squad?
I was not. No.
Ah.
I know a lot of the players that were on that team. I was there when Coach Tierney came into the University of Denver. I was at that like first level of transition as we really started to like first NCAA tournament. I was there the first time the conference tournament. So it was on its way, but yeah, unfortunately I was not there when they won it.
Yeah, big step for the Denver getting really good at lacrosse, because it started to move the sport west and present a lot of opportunity for those West Coast people to be exposed, because winning changes everything. Sure. And they were real good.
Yeah.
Well, speak to that then, introducing, because the weight room is not part of the lacrosse culture. So how did you...
It wasn't back then.
Yeah. So how did you aim to create this love and this passion and connection to performance? Once you got stronger and faster, you started to play better.
Yeah. It's funny because, you and I kind of went back and forth yesterday via email, and you kind of posed that question. And yeah, it's amazing because you're 100% right. I mean, when I started at the University of Denver, I literally had 35 to 40 guys in the weight room at one time, and it was an absolute circus. We had a ton of kids that, number one, we recruited a lot of Canadian players, and the Canadian players were highly skilled and horribly physically prepared. Mm-hmm. And then you had the opposite of that, which were you had a lot of like very high, what I would say, status level kids that came out of super, expensive schools, prep schools and things like that were massively entitled and stuff like that. And so this like weird dynamic of culture that, you had 40 guys in this room and trying to herd cats on a daily basis with our training. I had kids that would do everything they could to hide from me in the weight room, because they didn't want to look stupid because they were massively weak and they had no training experience. And I had no help being in, a small university where it was like, you're just flying solo, with whatever team you were working with until we gradually built an intern program. And then even when I started in 2007 with the Colorado Mammoth, I have a great story. I tell people that my first day at training camp, I walk in, and this is the first time I'm meeting like over half of the guys that are walking in the door. And a guy whose jersey is now hung in the rafters in Ball Arena downtown where we play and the Avalanche and the Nuggets play, walks up to me and says, "Hi, my name's Brian." Shakes my hand. He goes, "Never worked out. Don't plan to. Welcome to the team." Walks off. And I'm like, holy shit, like what just happened? Like I'm literally just dumbfounded. I don't even know what to say. Like it was just like he just drew a line right in the sand and just bolts. And I'm like, whew, what did I get myself into here? And you fast forward that year after year after year, and that same athlete, like 2 or 3 seasons later, is texting me like, "Hey man, I did this today." Like, he's bragging about like his workout that he did, and it became something that as you look at the game today at all levels, mainly speaking like collegiate and professional level, it went from where at the pro level, guys used to just be like, "It's time for lacrosse season. I'm gonna get my bag out of the trunk and we'll get going here." Mm-hmm. To if you show up at like, we're right now 1 month from training camp for us, and we'll have 35 guys show up that are competing for 24 spots, and probably realistically out of those extra 10 to 12 guys that are going to show up, those 10 to 12 guys are probably competing for 2 spots that are probably available on our roster, like going in. That's just fact. And if you show up with that mentality today, it's going to be a short camp for you, because the level of play, the speed, the strength, how prepared guys are now compared to the examples I just gave you, it's just night and day. And so there's been a lot of, head scratching over the years of trying to get to that point. Obviously now this will be my 15th season with the team. We were fortunate enough to finally win the championship last year, which was something that, quite frankly, I wondered if it was ever going to happen. And we just got on a run. I've always felt like we were really close, and the right dynamic of guys and locker room and leadership, and then just starting to play well when it really mattered. It's made my job finally get to the point where our veteran players and our older guys are completely bought in. I walk in this morning at 7:30 or a little after 7, and 3 of my guys were already here because they still have jobs and don't get paid millions of dollars. And one of the guys who's going to be a rookie that we invited to camp was in here working out with them as I walked in the door.
Nice.
And, that's something that, as 10 to 15 years ago, never would have happened. If there were a handful of guys that were supposed to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning, there's days I might have sat here by myself and been like, well, I might as well go have breakfast. So that part of it's definitely something that's been refreshing. And now with the amount of time, like I said, travel wise, I'm in and out of Canada over 10 times a year between now and June. Our schedule continues to ramp up and get longer every year. Last year was the longest season in the history of our league, where, like I said, we started November and the game 3 of the championship was the 3rd weekend of June. So it's if I hated it, I would definitely have been gone a long time ago.
Yeah. And it's awesome to see the success of both the NLL and then the PLL. We've had a couple PLL guys on the podcast that really owe their career to training, and that's why we highlighted them. It's fun to watch, man, and the dudes that put in the work. That's what we want to highlight, man. So you're definitely doing some good work. Do other NLL teams have strength coaches?
There's a good amount of them now, but there's still teams that don't, which is amazing. Georgia has a strength coach. They've actually contracted with Play for a few seasons now to bring in a coach there. Ron McKeefery actually started that when he was still out in Georgia. Dan Noble, who's a tremendous coach, he was at the Hill Academy for quite a few years and now kind of works on his own. He works for the Halifax team. I'm actually just getting ready to myself and Matt Nine, who's at Salisbury University, just committed to editing a new book for human kinetics on lacrosse training. And so we're pulling in guys like Jay Dyer and just a whole host of folks. Like we're trying to get John Grant Jr. and Paul Rabel and some other folks to put together, the forward, and hopefully that'll be a really good piece where a lot of good people that have trained and working with high level lacrosse folks will be able to hopefully create a good piece that will suit the game much better. That I don't think, there hasn't been a lot out there, especially when you look at books and training for lacrosse. So that was the reason that I was like, I've written a couple books previously, and when this one kind of popped up, I'm like, this would be a good one for me to put my hat on and maybe my last one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Writing books. Yeah. My high school team half play football, half don't. So it's amazing to see over the years the ones that do weightlift in school, even though it's, high school football weightlifting, just to see the jumps that they take and aiming to just bridge that gap even on the team I'm coaching the best I can. But man, for lack of skill, if you can push somebody around, they'll find a place for you on the field.
No,
for sure.
I do know from the clips we watched of the guys that were lacrosse, it's such an exciting sport. I just wasn't exposed to it.
And that's
and then also seeing these guys, move through space. You want to talk about different planes of motion, transverse. These guys are doing some amazing things. Like spinning and jumping in the air. The movement is extremely athletic.
Yeah, a lot of the top they're not big guys. So we're talking 5'7", 160 pounds, but they're the best at what they do. So it's cool. It's an opportunity for the smaller youth out there to get some PT.
Sounds good.
Our Yeah, I mean, and that, to go along with the training piece, I mean, the guys, they just keep getting bigger and faster. Our defensive core is 6'4", 6'5", 215, 220, and they can all move, they can all run, they're super agile. And so it is, it's the same as you, like I mentioned, growing up, how much lacrosse do you think was in Nebraska in the 90s?
About the same amount that was in California in the 90s.
Zero.
Zero.
And that's what's funny. People always ask, like, oh, where'd you play? And I'm like, yeah, I've got a stick downstairs, but and so as I started at the University of Denver, it just became something that, same as you. I was like, man, this would have been awesome. I would have loved to have been exposed to this game. And that's why I think you're seeing the growth in it the way that you do is once kids get their hands on a stick and get out and start throwing and catching and shooting and stuff like that, it catches on like wildfire. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I think a lot of people are choosing it as an alternative, especially with all the stuff that's going on with, football and concussions. Not that they don't exist in lacrosse, but, in Colorado, I mean, and I know it's getting very big in Texas too, right? You can drive around and there's kids playing lacrosse everywhere here. So.
No, it's a good sport. I was, had an interesting conversation with my daughter about this yesterday. When I was growing up, I mean, we're of similar age. If you were going to be a professional athlete, it was either football, basketball, or baseball. Maybe there were some Olympic sports, and other than that, like there was no. I mean, I knew some people that ran track, but had to go to Europe to even make any money at it. So like there was really only a few veins for this stuff, and now it's like. We're here in Austin. It's a big hub for jiu-jitsu. They just had that ADCC, which is the Abu Dhabi Combat Club. They had like 5, 6, 7, 10,000 people at this event in Vegas, which was no-gi jiu-jitsu. I mean, there's lacrosse. I mean, all of these sports. There's track. I mean, there's so many things for girls. I mean, girls water polo. It's amazing that there's so much more opportunity to be a professional athlete and to be the pinnacle of whatever you desire to do. Whereas before I felt like if you weren't going to go play baseball or go in the NFL or play hoops, I mean, you were pretty much relegated to corporate America.
Yeah, pretty much.
Joel, you training any martial artists, any jiu-jitsu folks, combat sports?
I have a guy, he was on Ultimate Fighter here a couple seasons ago. And he's still kind of working around, and I think he's been in I think it's a Texas promotion, but it's also owned by the UFC. I think it's a Reign of Fire or something like that. And so I've worked with him for the last close to a year. He's a little bit in between right now, and he's a big hunter too. So he's kind of off doing his thing for a little bit now, but we've had some before that have come through the doors. Previously, we had a handful of guys like early on in early UFC days where we had some guys actually through a gym. I don't know if you guys remember Chris Camozzi. Chris was in the UFC for quite a while. He moved into some kickboxing, and now he's kind of moving back into like some bare knuckle stuff. Like he's been around forever. Like I literally remember when Chris was starting. And, he's still at it like over a decade later. And I would say I love working with those guys, but man, that's a tough way to make money.
Yeah. I don't know if you're a fan of the bare knuckle fighting. They actually have like sanctioned now and actually have this bare knuckle boxing league. Paige Van Zandt, who was in the UFC, she got big into it. Yeah. I think she also fucking making probably $10-20 million a year in her OnlyFans. But, it was hilarious because I saw the clip of her in the bare knuckle thing, and she had all this like OnlyFans stuff. And then I was like,
she's sponsored by OnlyFans.
Oh, I think
it's a good move.
Has OnlyFans account, and she was trying to bring notoriety for her OnlyFans. So, I don't know. But I do know.
Yeah, Joel, you should hire her as a marketer.
I do know, man, the bare knuckle fighting is by far I've always just been a fight fan. Like I was always a boxing fan, and like now to see these, obviously the UFC started in '93, so to see the UFC grow to what it is, but then to also see that there's still space for some of these other things, and the bare knuckle fighting is absolutely fucking savage. Like I mean, it's like these dudes, it It reminds me
Like fun
of
to watch or tough to watch?
I enjoy it, but I think it's really good for people to watch because this is effectively what happens to people if you get into a bar fight where you get hit one time and your fucking face explodes. Like everybody's used to seeing TV and movies where these dudes are like bare knuckle fighting and throwing like 20 punches like The Rock and, you know, Dwayne or Vin Diesel are throwing fucking haymakers at each other, knocking each other over tables, and they don't even have a nick on their face. And then you're watching the bare knuckle fighting and this dude throws like a heavy overhand right and just splits this dude's face from like his forehead to his nose. And that's more reminiscent of every street fight I've ever been in and seen. And so like I fucking hate that TV has glamorized this because all you have to do is watch these dudes, and then in the post-fight production, you're like seeing these guys' faces and you're like, this is what every drunk idiot that ever goes out to a bar who wants to fight somebody needs to watch this, because this is how 99% of this shit ends up.
Yeah. Nah, I'm good on that.
Oh, dude, it's
I've
awesome.
always said I had a face made for radio, but I definitely not enjoyed getting it punched very many times.
My dad always said, be careful of getting to a place where you hold your fan club meetings in a phone booth.
Right, yeah.
So
yeah. Well, and I think that's the interesting dynamic with that too, is with the massive, rise in popularity of all the MMA stuff and whatever. I tell you what, back in the day, which makes you sound really old as soon as I said that, you used to, you could be dumb at a party or whatever, and two guys might fight and be done with it. And now it's like, yeah, you never know who you're going to run into if you mouth off at a bar some night, and some dude's highly trained and can put you in a pretzel or frickin' have you absolutely on your back in no time. It's like, I'm too old for that.
There's like, I think there's like 50 jiu-jitsu gyms in San Diego. So like if you were to go out down on like the Gas Lamp or in downtown San Diego, like PB or really down the Gas Lamp in San Diego, and like people were being jerks, you had like probably about a 70% chance of like running into somebody that had some form of combat training. Same in Orange County. Yeah. I mean, like the age old deal of like seeing the guy with the cauliflower ears. You're like, that guy's ears are pretty fucked up. I'm just going to stay away. We had a guy that come train with us yesterday who had some serious cauliflower ears. I'm like, man, that's got to be, well, I don't know, maybe most people don't know what to look at, but you see a dude with ears like that, you're like, this dude's going to fucking
I'm just going to go buy that man a
beer.
Yeah,
I'll be like, just ooh. Because. I was like, did I spill your drink? Let me get you too. And, but yeah, that's probably one of the situations now today. I mean, I still remember UFC 1, which was by far the best one because Horace Gracie came out and submitted all those dudes. Because like one of those, like they just hadn't seen Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the ground fighting and the way it was done. There were no weight classes. There was no time limits. It
wasn't a one-day tournament, so they just did.
Yeah, they just kept going. So if you won, you progressed.
They might have like five or six people that they had to fight. Yeah, in a day,
and
like a bracket.
And dude. Horace, who wasn't a physically impressive dude, like his brother was way more physically impressive, but I think they put him into it the way the story goes because they wanted to show that a guy who doesn't look like an absolute fucking monster goes in and submits all these dudes. And to this day, it's still the greatest like fucking deal I've ever seen that he showed up and submitted all of these dudes and crushed them, and it was great.
Yeah, I know. I've seen.
He just had to soak one or two punches every time. That's all he did. He just soaked one or two punches, get him to the ground. They had no idea what to do, and it was over. Yeah,
it was chokes, arm bars. I mean, it was great. And I remember like seeing it and then seeing to where it's progressed. I really wish they would Dana White, who actually Dana White just got in shape. I was telling you, he had some guys come in that did his DNA, said you got 10 years to live, and he got his fat ass in shape. So this guy said, hey, I can take your DNA and give you an accurate snapshot down to within a day or two of how long you're going to live. What? And the guy was like, based upon your physical state, you have 10 years left. And so now I think Dana's got, like, he's posted a picture because I follow him on Instagram. He's gotten in shape, and he's like, I don't want this to be the end of it. I got too much to do. So I appreciate that. But I wish Dana White would take a snapshot and we could go back in time to the original UFC 1 and do it the same way. No weight classes, no time limits, and make it a tournament where like you draw the brackets, and if you fight as many people as you can on that day.
This is the plot of Mortal Kombat.
Well, so the thing that I don't know if you guys watched the most recent one where I think it's Hazmet, who's the dude with the beard. Hosmet doesn't make weight, and then he's not able to fight Nick Diaz. So Nate Diaz, and then they gave Diaz another fight, and then they let this dude fight another dude.
Well, why'd they do that?
Like in previous years, if you didn't make the fucking weight, like you're out. And I think the guy was such a big draw, and they said that the doctors, whatever, but he missed his weight by 7 pounds. So they gave him another fight, which I don't know has ever happened.
So they just waited.
They just found somebody a little bit heavier.
Above.
But if you think about the way the UFC is, it's kind of stupid on weight classes. Like in boxing, you have all these weight classes that are like every 6, 8, 10 pounds. In the UFC, it's like you go from like 85 to like 99. And then it's like 265. So, I mean, they have these huge gaps. So I think they need to do more weight classes. And, but I definitely know, like, I mean, there was one dude in there who was fighting at 85 and would make the weight and then put on 40 pounds and then showed up at like 225.
Well, how much they got? 24 hours?
Yeah. So, I mean, that dude was able to cut that much weight. I just think, at least in the fight game, for me personally, I would love to see them have to weigh in like an hour before they get out on the mat, like, or they enter the cage. Like, it just feels like, I mean, shit, dude. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm some more of a purist in it, but I'd still love to see that UFC one where, you know what, all the weight classes, just fucking throw them out, no time limits, and just send dudes out there.
Yeah.
Because
heavyweight 265, lightweight 205, middle 185, welter 170, lightweight 155.
Yeah, they got 4 weight classes.
Well, they got more. It's just super.
No,
flyweight's 125.
Yeah, but that's in the UFC.
Yeah.
So, whereas in boxing, I mean, it's like every 6 or 8 pounds.
Oh yeah.
I know they do jiu-jitsu where they'll do like long 2-hour matches to just prove who's the best. So like they go, they'll set a time limit like 2 hours, and then the guy, like the person with
just
the most
one-on-one
submissions,
for 2 hours.
So the guy with the most submissions, kind of like we went to that flow grappling deal where Gordon Ryan wrestled that dude, that exhibition, and they set a time limit, and he like tapped the dude out. Like the guy tapped out 6 times. So they'll do that where they set a time, and they'll be like, okay, who's the best? The guy that gets the most submissions or the most, however it works, and they'll do that for a couple hours. I mean, not very exciting to watch. Kind of boring, but pretty neat that dudes are that skilled to be able to go out and do that combat.
Yeah, Joel's jiu-jitsu just blowing up in Denver like everywhere else.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know how they do that with, like rankings and whatever, but I know like Elevation Fight Team and a few of the other ones here that have had, so many really, really high level UFC guys, that the amount of gyms here that, either have, whether it's just jiu-jitsu or whether they're, a full MMA style place. I mean, they're everywhere. I mean, I know people all the time that, I'm going to jiu-jitsu, and I think that Denver's become a really good hub with that. If you look at the amount of guys like Neil Magny and Cowboy Cerrone and, who was the heavyweight that fought Lesnar for the title. He was from Denver. I mean, there's just been a whole boatload of them. And so it's kind of become a hub a little bit based on, I think, guys wanting to train at elevation. And then, those gyms have kind of fostered a lot more. So there's a huge presence of that around here too, for sure.
No, they recently there's a kid who was actually he's from here in Texas, but he wrestled at Penn State and was a real high level wrestler. So he just got in the UFC and is fucking murdering these dudes. I think it's Bo Nickel. So I just saw a bunch of clips of him yesterday, and and he's was a high level wrestler, from Penn State, and is out there actually, dude, going to do pretty well in the UFC. Just because I don't know if they've really had any really high level wrestlers. I mean, who is it?
Guzman.
Yeah, Guzman. Then also was it Mendez? God, I'm trying to remember who else was the wrestler. Yeah, I mean, so there's been some good wrestlers, but this kid's pretty legit. So So you're gonna laugh at this. I had obviously retired from the NFL. I didn't watch NFL football for a long time, just because I was still fucking mad about the way it ended. I wasn't ready, and it took me a while. And then I started watching football again, And then for some whatever reason, I got mad at fucking paying DirecTV. I thought it was a scam. I really wasn't using it, so I canceled it, which canceled our NFL ticket. And so we didn't really watch it. And then my wife's like, let's fucking enough. Let's get football back. So we ordered Hulu. And the problem is all those streaming services, you need like a newer TV, and our TV was old. So I was telling Chris this. I was like, fuck it. So I went down. I got a Best Buy open box, came home with it set up on Sunday, and we started watching the NFL. And the quality of the HD and the cameras and just the experience on TV in these new, on Hulu on these games is absolutely amazing, to the point where I've watched a bunch of NFL on Sunday. I watched the game last night just because the experience is so much more rich. The NFL and TV has done such a good job with these streaming services, like the fan experience of sitting there, and like it's really pretty amazing. But it's the same within the fight stuff.
Yeah, you're gonna have to order the fights now, and I mean, I'll just come over.
I love watching the fights. I love the UFC. So, I mean, anything like where you get two individuals that get that much opportunity to train, and then they get to go pit themselves against it. I mean, in the UFC, I mean, I always think of, what was that, Masvidal dude, like hitting that dude with the knee and knocking him out the first touch. Whereas, football's more like, hey, I'm going to line up and we're going to one-on-one fight for 3 hours. So, I mean, it's just two different things, but I still just love the combat nature of it. And I love to see people effectively sharpen their blade and then try to go out there and fucking slice a dude. So it's great to watch.
For sure.
Now they've done a good job in terms of like what's coming out. I mean, there's so much to watch that I feel like, man, there's a lot of opportunity. So it's good. I'm excited.
Cool. Joel, awesome. Thank you for your time, dude. I know we were up, down, and around, but if people want to learn more, where can they go to follow you, what you're doing, Fast Performance, and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Fastperformance.com. That's our website. Hunt Hike Harvest Outdoors is hunthikeharvest.com if you're into the outdoor and the hunting piece. If you look me up on basic socials, is just Joel Raether, at Joel Raether, and always up to chat, always up to share, always up for new connections and things like that. So I'm not too tough to find, and I appreciate you guys having me on. I thank you guys for your time. It's always fun to, it's crazy how, like you said, we kind of bounced around, but I'm like, well, we could talk for another couple hours if we wanted to.
That's usually how it goes.
Yeah, it's always the way.
Yeah.
All right. And then, there you have it. Thank you for listening to another episode of Power Athlete Radio.
Bye.
Bye.